people used to say to me at the start, well, what are you aiming for with these kids? And I would say an ordinary life,
Mm,
because an ordinary life is the great aspiration for
yeah.
children who've experienced trauma. Almost everywhere I've been, not everywhere, but almost everywhere,
Mm,
there have been great, compassionate mentors.
mm,
But the day I knew that something had clicked for him was one of the other kids was having his birthday and we were having a barbecue on the deck, and he had forgotten to bring the boys present
mm,
that he'd made in the school. And he came up to me and he said, "Will you walk with me up to the house? I want to get the present." Then the Children's Court magistrates intervened and
mm,
wrote a letter to the department saying what is happening in your residential care system,
mhm.
because we're seeing children come in through the family division and then they come back before us again and again and again in the criminal division. It's compelling to
Yeah.
try and save resources, but what do we do in terms of the judgment and the decision we make about the lives of people you've never met?
Hi, welcome to the Secure Start podcast. I'm Colby Pierce, and joining me for this episode is a highly experienced expert practitioner here in Australia. Before I introduce my guest, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we're meeting on, the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains for me, and the Wurundjeri people of the Melbourne area of Victoria for my guest. I'd also like to acknowledge the continuing connection that all living Aboriginal people feel to land, waters, culture, and community, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. My guest this episode is Adela Holmes. Adela has a career spanning 52 years, during which she has worked in the child protection, child and family welfare, and out of home care fields for both the Victorian state government and the non government sector. Adela has a well established track record in designing, developing, and delivering complex trauma grounded therapeutic care services for the most complex and challenging children and adolescents, and an expertise for working successfully with and supporting others to work with these children and adolescents. During her career, Adela has designed and been involved in the startup leadership and management of significant therapeutic service initiatives funded by the Victorian state government. These include the Take Two Intensive Therapeutic Service and the Victorian Government's successful pilot therapeutic residential care program, Hurstbridge Farm. 12 other pilot programs were developed using the same model, and in 2011, all 13 were evaluated as being highly effective in producing positive life outcomes. Adela has been specialising as a trainer in the utilisation of complex trauma frameworks since 2000, and during this time has consolidated an extensive knowledge base and expertise in trauma and attachment informed therapeutic practice, both as a practitioner and a trainer. Adela also specialises in the facilitation of reflective practice groups, and in her consultancy work, Adela delivers to such groups as a visiting consultant on a regular basis. In October 2024, Adela was awarded the inaugural Centre for Excellence in Child and Family Welfare Industry Lifetime Achievement Award for services to out of home care. Adela has no interest in retiring as she loves what she does and still has much energy to provide input into the healing care of children impacted by complex trauma. Adela believes strongly in the capacity of well-designed and well-executed models of therapeutic residential care to bring about effective healing that is grounded in the growth of real relational capacity. In such settings, well-trained individuals can bring about the kind of real change required to heal from traumatic early beginnings and trust in the capacity of adults to provide safe, loving, respectful, and kind care. Welcome, Adela.
Thank you, Colby. Good to be here.
And Adela, I'm 30 years deep into a career working in a very similar space to you in the adjoining state here in Australia. And I think your ongoing energy and passion is remarkable, which is not to say that I'm not still passionate about the work, but I do experience some dips in energy from time to time. How have you sustained your energy and passion for this work across 52 years?
Well, it's a really interesting question because 52 years ago when I started, I'd really fallen into the work. Um, as I think I was saying to you a bit earlier, I started out my adult life as a folk singer. And
Yes.
I was singing, I was born and raised in the UK, came to Australia in 1965. And it was at the height of coffee lounges and folk singers. And I'd always sung. I was, as a little girl, I was put up on tables and said,
Oh,
told to,
really?
yeah, at family weddings or other do's. So I'd always sung, got here, saw that there were a lot of coffee lounges, thought, oh, this looks good. Um, and so I kind of fell into this work.
Mm,
I always had an interest in the mind and
yes.
psychology and things connected with that. Um, so I read in a fairly eclectic manner from the age of about 16 in
Mm,
that sphere. In fact, the first book I read was by a guy called A.S. Neil, Neill, a Scottish teacher who opened up a school in the UK
mm,
for children with difficulties. It was a boarding school, uh, and the school was called Summerhill. The book was called Summerhill.
mm,
Then got interested in the work of R.D. Laing, the Scottish psychiatrist, and I think the people who I read back
mm,
then had formed my thinking because they had enormous passion and
mm.
energy for the work. So there was no such thing as not being passionate about it. And I think that mindset just has stuck with me
Wow.
uh, because they were passionate and their writings demonstrated that passion really strongly. And I suppose the other thing, which is not a very scientific answer, but I've always, as an individual, in my memory, only ever had on and off.
Mm,
There's not a modulator in between.
yeah.
I'm either on or off. So
Hmm.
when I'm on, I'm on. Um, I do have off times, but off time will be reading or doing other fun things, which some people might describe as on time. I don't
Mm. Okay.
know, but they're. I think also when you see what you do works,
Mm.
that kind of drives you with a bit of passion to keep going and do more of it.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. It's fair. It's reassuring. It's reward reinforcing. I think was also the word
Yeah,
I was
yeah,
looking for there. Yeah, um, it's a vocation
yeah.
rather than a job, isn't it?
It is. It
Yeah,
absolutely is.
yeah.
And I know that that's why I have no intention to retire because you're right.
Mm,
It is a vocation.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Wonderful. So, I was going to ask you what led you to working in the area of
Oh,
designing and implementing
yeah.
therapeutic residential care programs, which is of great interest to me. Um, and one of the reasons why I started this podcast and chose certain people to interview,
Mm.
um, but I've heard you speak already about those first two authors who designed therapeutic schools.
Mm.
Reminds me a lot of the Dr. Drysdales and the
Yeah.
Mulberry Bush School.
Yes.
And of course, Barbara Docker Drysdale was very important in the early days of the Cotswold community.
Absolutely.
And I've
Um,
recently had John Whitwell on.
yeah, I saw that interview.
Yeah.
Um, I've met John when I was in the UK in 2008.
Mm.
Um, and also, I do a fair bit of interface with Patrick Tomlinson.
Yes.
Um, and I have said to him laughingly that I have what I call Cotswold envy because
Yes.
I was too young. Well, no,
Mm.
actually, I'm older than him, but
Yeah.
um, at the time that I was in the UK, I couldn't have worked in a
No.
setting like that because I was too young.
Mm.
And then I
Yeah.
came to Australia, and there was no such thing as a setting like that.
No. No.
So
And
I guess I never. Well, I did my own, but and we I think created something similar at Hurst.
mm.
Not quite the same, but very similar.
Mm.
Um, but again, that sort of sense of vocation.
Mm.
And when you see something works, I've always also been what's the word? Pretty outspoken, I suppose,
Mm-hmm.
but only in defence of something good, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but a lot of times, things that have worked haven't necessarily been promulgated further because of systemic issues, egos, which play a role in there, um, and resources.
Mm. Yeah.
And, when you see that getting in the way of something that works
Mm.
to heal kids, I will never be quiet about that. Never, ever.
Yeah, well, good on you. And yeah, it is frustrating that often extraneous factors
Yeah.
are what gets in the way of the longevity of certain programs. And of course, the Cotswold, I have a lot to do with Patrick as well,
Mm.
and the Cotswold community no longer,
No.
and part of that, as I is my understanding, had to do with scandals that occurred in the residential care sector um, in the UK.
Mm.
Um, but I'm hoping to speak to someone on a future podcast that can shed a bit of light on about um, that issue, the issue of quality of care and consistency of care, good quality care
Mm.
in residential care versus other forms of out of home care. But so
Mm.
watch your space, people. Haven't quite got there yet, but hoping to.
Good.
Um, and the other thing you wouldn't have found here was therapeutic schools.
No.
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 Um,
And I know, having been brought up in the UK, there's that long history of what was called Borstal, which were
mm,
corrective residential schools,
yeah.
which have morphed into something different.
Mm,
Um, but those residential schools that were therapeutic, um, I've read a lot about many of them. And when I was putting together the Hurstbridge model,
Mm,
part of my big part of my research was a book that was put together. I think it was edited by Adrian Ward.
mm,
Um, a lot of people who had run services that I think grew from the Cotswold community
mm.
had written chapters
Oh,
in the book
okay.
that I read.
Mm,
And I actually met many of those people when I was in the UK in 2008. Alan Worthington, um, and I went to the Mulberry Bush School. So
yes.
all, the places that had sort of grown out of the Cotswold
Mm,
community, I made it my business wherever I could
mm,
to visit them. And I must say that Adrian Ward, all I did was send him an email saying, I'm going to be in the UK in November. I wonder if you could give me some numbers to
mm.
contact people so I could go and see services.
Yep.
He developed me a whole 1 week itinerary of
Oh,
visit.
wow.
it was I was knocked out, and I
Mm,
just got on the train and went from one place to another, and was absolutely knocked out with what I saw.
yeah.
But it was great. I'd been doing Hurstbridge for a year
Mm,
at the time, and I could see some of the practices that I based Hurstbridge on,
hmm.
and I could see how well they worked, and that
Yeah.
gave me great fire and
Mm,
inspiration to keep going.
awesome. Yeah. Um, So we'll talk, we will talk more in a little
Yeah.
bit about Hurstbridge. And I know that people who are listening to this podcast and know anything about you will be very keen to hear you talk more about that.
Mm.
I'm just wondering, you talked about, you've read some books about therapeutic work, therapeutic residential work, including in a school-based setting. How did you, but you've also talked about how it just didn't exist here.
Yeah.
How did you come to be at the forefront um, of developing these therapeutic residential care programs like Hurstbridge, who
Yeah.
we'll talk about, as I said. How did you get into that space to be able to bring it about?
Yeah, it's a good question actually when I reflect on it. So, I mean, my first job at the end of 1972, and it's funny, I was I was in funny, strange
Yeah.
juxtaposition between doing this interview and events over the past 2 or 3 weeks here. I
Mm,
had a very formative mentor mentee relationship with a woman called Pat Simmons, who had been the superintendent,
hmm.
we're talking old times here, of the very first place that I worked.
Mm,
Had been, as I said, I fell into my study, discovered I could do it, discovered I had a real ability to do it,
hmm.
and then it was kind of onwards and upwards. But I was doing my final placement in doing welfare studies, and it was at a place called Youth Welfare Division in the what was then called the Social Welfare Department. It was a
Hmm.
very new department in Melbourne,
Yeah.
in Victoria, and so it was office based, and you would go out and do outreach visits to young people who were in the institutions
Hmm.
because it was all institutionally based at the time. And it was coming to the end of the course. My only income capacity was back to the coffee lounges and earning $5 a night until I could find something in the sector.
Yeah.
And I spoke to the person in charge then at that place. And I said, are there any jobs going here? He said, well, no, there aren't. Um, but there's a very new initiative starting up in May next year.
Hmm.
It's a community based diversionary program to keep young women out of the institution.
Mm.
And I thought, oh, that does sound interesting. So I did a couple of interviews with the people who were going to run it. Um, but then I said to him, well, that's great. That's good in May next year. But here we are in November now, and I need to earn some money. Is there anything else?
Mm-hmm.
And he suggested that I work at the institution that they
Mm.
were building this diversionary program for, which was a place called Winlayton. So it
Mm-hmm.
had, upwards of 100 girls who had been through the children's court, um, either offend for criminal offences,
Mm-hmm.
um, or were considered to be what they called back then exposed to moral danger,
Okay. Wow.
in need of care,
Yeah.
basically.
Mm.
Uh, so I said, all right, had no real idea what I was walking into exactly,
Mm.
but it sounded like it was up my alley. So I said yes, went to work there, and by golly, I learned, I mean, there were some things I would never replicate, but
Mm-hmm.
there were many elements of the relational aspect of working with
Mm.
girls that I retain to this day. And there was a woman there running the place called, as I say, Pat Simmons. Pat very sadly suffered from dementia for the last 8 to 10 years, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and she died on Good Friday.
Mm.
So I went to her funeral last
Mm.
Friday, and I was thinking a lot about exactly what you've asked me. And
Mm.
I suppose what I saw when I went into that role at when Leighton told me what you should do and what you shouldn't do in deeply experiential terms, because it was like
Mm.
I walked in, I put my uniform on, and there I was, and I just had to do it.
Mm.
Um, and I saw from the very beginning with Pat's mentorship that it was all about relational capacity, regulation, and co regulation. I didn't use those words then, but that's what it felt like. And that's later what I learned it was.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the capacity to look past behaviour and understand what sat behind it.
Mm.
And, we were working two staff on a unit with 24 girls in it.
Mm.
And you had to learn some very valuable things about the mood and the rhythm of
Mm-hmm.
what was happening in that large group of young women,
Mm.
and also, therefore, how to intervene in a way that was a bit cleverer than just,
Mm.
you can't do that,
Mm.
because that doesn't work. It might work for 10 minutes or half an hour, but it doesn't actually do anything, doesn't change anything.
Probably
And
just
so,
stirs them up.
yeah, well, actually, someone at the funeral
Mm.
talked about an event where a number of young women had climbed up on the roof of this place when Leighton. I'm not quite sure what the reason was, they weren't either, but talked about the example of how Pat, everybody was going to ring the fire brigade and the police, and it was all going to escalate.
Mm.
But Pat said, no, don't want you to do any of that. I'm going to go up there and
Yeah.
talk to
I thought you were
them.
going to say that.
And she did.
Mm.
And within half an hour, all the shouting calmed down. Within half an hour, they'd all taken off their clothes and they were standing up there in their underwear.
Mm.
Um, Within half an hour, they were all starting to feel cold. Why? Because they weren't in a heightened state. Their heightened state was making them immune to the cold.
Mm. mm,
But all of a sudden, when they started to come down and engage in the conversation with Pat, they started to feel cold, all put their clothes on, climbed down, and came inside. So that's the kind of person she was, and that's the kind of mentorship I received right from the word go. And it just fitted so
mm,
well with what I'd read
mm,
in Summerhill,
mhm,
what I'd read of Artie Lang's work.
mm,
Artie Lang lived in a household with people who were diagnosed with schizophrenia.
mm,
He was no believer in schizophrenia. He resided in a house with them. I think there was a film made of it called, I think it was called Sanctuary. But a number of people worked with them and lived with them.
mm.
And if you look at the film, it's probably unable to be accessed anymore, but I saw it. Um, it's just people talking to each other.
And that's what I mean when you're describing your role, that initial role in I guess what we would think about more these days in terms of a youth training centre for
Yes,
girls. Um, you were talking about the staff to girls ratio, which
yes,
was yeah quite different to what you might observe these days. But and my mind was initially going to my mind was going to it's not how good a disciplinarian you are that will maintain calmness and order in that unit. It's how well you're able to develop a relationship with all the individuals, because the
absolutely.
relationship is the most powerful regulating influence
Yep.
that you would have had at that time. And part
And
of that is, as you said, is engaging with the young people with deep understanding of their experience. So not getting distracted with what they're doing, but getting, focusing more on why they're doing those things. And in those circumstances, the young people feel heard and understood and validated in their experience, and
yep,
they'll regulate in
of course they will.
consideration
They'll
of that
they'll
relationship.
regulate without realizing even why or how,
Mm,
um, because the person is interested in them. It never ceases to amaze me. I think a lot in metaphors, right? And I often use the metaphor of what works in physical health and
mhm,
what works in emotional, psychological health.
mm,
Now, if you walked into the emergency room of a hospital and went up to the triage nurse and said, "Oh, I've got a pain in my right side," does the triage nurse use a bit of compassion and empathy and get the details from you and help you feel better? Or do they yell at you from behind the glass, "Stop that this minute"? But it's the same thing
mm,
with what's going on emotionally.
mm,
Yeah, we come to triage kids every day of the week. I do either directly or indirectly with staff who need to work directly with
mm,
them. And where's the compassion? You know,
mm. Yeah.
where's the understanding
Mm,
um, that we would automatically apply if
mm.
it was something physical?
I think it's that question, what's really going on here?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's not what you present with, it's the reason
yeah,
for that
exactly.
presentation. Yeah,
But
lovely.
but it seems to the desire or the ability to do that seems
Mm,
to fly out of the window
mm,
when what we're looking at is something to do with behavior.
aye,
Um,
yeah.
and that's something to do with the person on the other end as well.
Mm, mm,
So I guess thinking about that induction into the work and working in the diversionary program that we did,
mhm,
um, that I think helps me to understand what set me on a pathway.
mhm,
And the pathway wasn't straight. I did some things. I went back to singing for a little while, came back into the work, worked in child protection in the mid 70s. I think my good fortune along the way has been that almost everywhere I've been, not everywhere, but almost everywhere,
Mm.
there have been great, compassionate mentors.
Mm.
Not to the same extent as Pat. No one,
Mm.
I don't think anyone will ever achieve the level of mentorship and influence that she had on my later career and
Mhm.
thinking. But there are in pockets
Mm.
uh, that approach. There's enough people out there to be able to go, yeah, okay, so we're not going to do this. We're going to approach this in this way and use the brains that we have in our heads to think about this
Mm.
intelligently. And seeing that in those early days and seeing the results of my, you'd have to say, rudimentary attempts to work relationally with kids, but I
Mhm.
learned from what didn't work and what did work. But seeing that, I think, has provided me with the fuel for the passion
Mm.
to keep going in
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And of course, because I had that fuel for the passion, I stayed on that track. So that my passion, really,
Mm.
I do other things and
Mhm.
I'm as passionate about those other things. But my first passion
Mm.
was for therapeutically working in a residential setting
Yeah.
because you have the entire day, the entire life of the young person rolling out before you. And that affords us so many opportunities.
So your passion led you ultimately to Hurstbridge and the
Yeah,
development of the Hurstbridge
yeah,
residential farm and community. I think people who are listening would really love to hear a little bit about how Hurstbridge came about and your role
yeah,
in that, and the model of care that you were responsible for there.
yeah. Okay, so there's a little bit of systemic explanation I have to do to explain how both Take Two and Hurstbridge Farm came about.
Yep.
So in the early 90s in Victoria, there was a premier called Geoffrey Kennett. I think he's quite well known because it was a Liberal Victorian government, and he was a person who understood the value of a funding cut. Let's put it, and was looking at things in a different way. Now, through the late 80s, there had been many discussions about the need to deinstitutionalise services in the
Mm.
state. Great discussions. But by the time he came into power, those discussions had taken a slightly different twist because they obviously also afforded the opportunity to cut money
Hmm.
and redeploy resources, which is which he made full use of, might I say.
Mm. I
Uh,
remember.
so, in actuality, the deinstitutionalization process was to some extent, and it probably varied across the state and the service system,
Hmm.
but it was to some extent put into the service of funding cuts
Hmm.
and you know, focusing of funding. Having said that, what that resulted in was a deinstitutionalisation process for young people that was probably quite stripped of resources in a way it was never intended to be.
Mm.
I can't say that for sure, but that's my guess.
Mm.
So What that meant was that the way it was done was quite squished.
Hmm.
So the staff who had worked in the institutions, some of them were offered the option of redundancy packages, and some of them were redeployed to work with kids in houses in the community.
Hmm.
But of course, there is a very big difference between working with children in an institutional setting with all the things that surround you and working in a house in a suburb with access to no one and nothing. You're on your own, you know. And over the course of about 2 or 3 years, the workforce was heading towards being quite industrialized about that.
Mm. Okay.
People were getting assaulted. Of course, children and young people who really struggle with internal regulation for all the reasons we know in
Hmm.
terms of complex trauma and early life experiences are going to punch a hole in the wall when they're frustrated because they can't talk about how they feel.
Mm.
Now, in the institution, there were solutions for that, but in the community, there weren't any.
Mm.
So the staff were encouraged to ring the police if a young person was out of control, which, of course, is the beginning of a long period of criminalisation of these
Hmm.
young people. And I have nothing to base this on but my own experience. But I would not mind hazarding a guess that up to 80 or 90% of adult people now in prison were those children
Mm.
because they became criminalised.
Hmm.
Not all of them, but a fair percentage.
Mm.
So, we were on a hiding to nothing in the system. And during that period of time, I was working in child protection, very closely seeing the impacts of these decisions. And I was a case planner. So these decisions were having a major impact on the quality of care that we were able to provide children.
Hmm.
And in the mid or the industrialization was noted, and what the response to that was the outsourcing to the community service sector. It was a great solution because
Make it
exactly,
someone else's problem.
yeah, and the same thing happened. So
Mm.
what we ended up with in the mid 90s was a highly criminalised group of children in the residential care system, which could have been something wonderful, but ended up something not wonderful.
Mm.
Um, then the Children's Court magistrates intervened and
Mm.
wrote a letter to the department, whatever it was called then, it changes names every
It
so
does a bit. Yeah.
often, wrote a letter saying what is happening in your residential care system
Hmm.
because we're seeing children come in through the family division and then they come back before us again and again and again in the criminal division. And good on them because they called it out.
Mm. Yeah.
And that led to the commissioning of an investigation and a report. The investigation was undertaken by a fabulous woman called Robin Clark and two associates, um, looking at those children who were coming back before the criminal division of the courts again and again and again. I case planned some of them, so I was quite involved in that process. And to cut a very long story short, the report, which is called When Care Is Not Enough,
Hmm.
which is I highly recommend to anybody. It was published in 1999, but it's as relevant now as it was then because it's based on the same truths.
Mm.
And in that, their two main recommendations were number one, the child and adolescent mental health service system does not suit child protection clients, they won't
Mhm.
go. They
Mhm.
won't. They
No.
won't front up.
Mm.
Um, and so develop a service designed specifically for those kids. That became Take Two.
Mhm.
Uh, and develop a therapeutic residential care model. That became Hurstbridge Farm. So they were the two recommendations of that report, that review and report.
Mm.
The government changed to Labor persuasion.
More
Um,
sympathetic, perhaps.
and there were quite a number of people who were very committed to doing this.
Mm.
And so from about 2000 to 2002, there was a lot of activity in the head office of the department. And they came up with the realization that what probably would make sense was to go first with the outreach service
Mhm.
and put some energy into that. At that time, I was working for Berry Street.
Mm.
Um, it's a large service provider in Victoria that is non-religious, but funded by the government.
Yep.
And I made the mistake. We were all in a meeting. I was in a senior management role. I was relatively new to Berry.
Mhm.
And we were in a meeting discussing the consortium that we were going to put together to put our hands up for that outreach mental health service. I put my hand up like that and said, look, whoever does it, not thinking that I would, I
Be
had
that.
been on the right, fairly junior on the tree. Um, I said, whoever does it, I'd really like to help them because I'm very interested in those sorts of services. And the CEO at the time, a woman called Sandy DeWolf, said, no, you can do it.
Oh, be careful what you ask for.
Yeah. Um, I said, oh, really? This is a $5.5 million
Mm.
program annually, recurrent for 3 years, with, and then, of course, dependent on outcomes. Um, so, if we get it, great career move. If we don't
Mm.
get it, bad career move. But I said, oh, okay. And we had 6 weeks to write it. Um, I wrote it. I designed the model with the assistance of a couple of people who were in the other parts of the consortium.
Mhm.
Um, but we put together what we thought would work. And it was all grounded in what was for us an emerging understanding about complex trauma and
Yep.
how to approach it. Um, and we got it. It was a good career.
Then you had to do it.
So we got that in, I think we were advised in mid 2000, or yeah, mid-ish 2003.
Mhm.
And then we got going with it, and I got so connected with it, I couldn't really let it go. You know what it's like.
Mm.
It's like, this is
Your
my
baby.
baby.
Mm.
So I applied for a position in it and was one of the founding area managers of it. We were led by a fabulous guy, psychologist called Rick Pawsey, who
Mhm.
had worked with the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service, who were part of the consortium. He was a fabulous leader. Um, and again, great mentor.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
so we had the support from the head office of the department. It was all systems go. We recruited, I think, something like 43 people in a month.
Mm.
And I remember doing the interviews. It was like, oh, right, okay. Um, and we were fully staffed by October 2003. And then we started accepting clients in the beginning of 2004.
Mm.
So I was with that endeavour, which was
Mm.
going really well um, from the start. And in about 2005, the department started to then think about the second recommendation, which was the pilot.
Mhm.
And I was at that stage in a role where I was the statewide services development manager
Mhm.
in Take Two.
Take two. Yeah.
And so really it came to that role to write the
Mm.
pilot and research it,
Mhm.
which was extremely exciting because this was my passion.
Mm.
So I'd kind of got myself without a career plan of any sort, but being led by the passion,
Yeah.
where I was right there
Mm. At the right
at,
time.
at the right time. It was a very fortunate juxtaposition. So I think I spent about 6 months
Mhm.
reading, researching, mainly drew from the work of Bruce Perry, Bessel
Mm.
van der Kolk, Dan Hughes, um, some others as well, Sandra Bloom, certainly, in terms of how they made sense of what you needed to actually do
Yeah.
in working with kids.
Mm.
Put that together with my own experience, reading, etc., um, and wrote a proposal for a model.
Mhm.
And then we sent it to the two regions who were going to fund it and operate it. And, that's nerve wracking because you spend all this time reading, putting together, writing, and it was a massive thing to write. Like it was,
Mm.
you know, really A, important, and B, had to be very precise and grounded in evidence. Um, and that was when I read the book and used the writing from the Cotswold community people
Yeah.
and beyond. Um, and they came back to us having read it and said, "We love it. It's what we want. It is exactly what we want."
Mm.
So this was my second baby. I already had a daughter, one daughter. So this was like my third baby, really.
Mm.
And again, I couldn't not do it, really. It was
Mm.
like, really? No, come on. So then I went into the role of being the founding manager.
Of Hurstbridge Farm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, Colby, because people, because we called it Hurstbridge Farm, because it
Mm.
was 33 acres with animals on it, people think that it's the farm environment that
Mm.
is the key, but it's not.
So relationships.
Relationships.
Mm.
um, and the freedom to trial what seems to work in other settings,
Mhm.
if it works in this setting. We also had fabulous backing to do
Mm.
it at head office level. And I will mention names because I think they deserve to be mentioned.
Sure.
The minister at the time was a guy called Gavin Jennings, who was a social
Mm.
worker
Mhm.
and totally understood what the model was and what we were trying to do.
Mhm.
So he was really, really fantastic to have in that role. And the bureaucrat who sat above this and sanctioned all of it is a guy called David Clements,
Mhm.
who repeatedly said, "Oh, I don't really understand all this." I mean, he's a social worker.
Mm.
Um, and he does understand it, but he said, "I just, I have my faith and trust in the people who are doing it." And I repeatedly over time have said to him, "Yeah, but, you know, there you go, Dave." you also understood what we were doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I still think he's a bit too modest. That's why I named
Mm,
because he should take a bow. He made it happen,
mm.
and he had a. You know, if you think of that first cohort of eight kids who came through the farm, he had a direct impact on their lives, whether he acknowledges it or not,
And their children.
because he supported it.
Yeah. And their
Uh,
children and their
and that,
grandchildren.
yes, absolutely right.
Mm,
Absolutely right, down through the
mm.
generations.
Yeah.
Um, and a fairly high percentage in the region of 65 to 75% of
Mm,
those young people showed clear improvements in
hmm.
their lives, like an upward trajectory,
Mm.
when a comparison group of kids over the same period either plateaued and stayed troubled
Yeah.
or worse.
Or got worse. Yeah.
So there's a fabulous diagram in
Mm,
that report, which is called the Verso Evaluation of Therapeutic Residential Care Violence. Um, it's just there. It's a little very simple graph that they've done,
mm.
but it's like,
Yeah. So it just changed the trajectory, didn't it?
yeah, the
In
trajectory.
figuratively and actually.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So, and I say the original staff,
Mm,
um, are still in contact with many of those kids.
mm,
And people used to say to me at the start, well, what are you aiming for with these kids? And I would say an ordinary life,
mm.
because an ordinary life is the great aspiration for
Yeah.
children who've experienced trauma.
Mm. In
What
their
they do with it
families.
after that, that's up to them. You know,
Mm.
they have the wherewithal by that stage. But an ordinary life is good enough for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And I used to say, well, just an ordinary life. And many of them, most of them, in fact, have an ordinary life. If it's not totally ordinary, it's closer to than any other trajectory they might have been on.
Yeah. That's fantastic, and not probably not dissimilar to the stories that come out of the Cotswold community,
Yeah,
um, that you were so envious of,
yeah,
and yeah, and I'm tremendously interested in as well. You had the opportunity to go back there quite recently to back
yes.
to Hurstbridge Farm. What were some key observations or take homes that you took from that visit?
Well, one of the key observations that it came about because, the award ceremony that I was at, where I got that lifetime achievement thing, um, the woman has managed it for about the last 10 years, I think, a woman called Lena La Mandola, and a small amount of her team were actually there doing a presentation for that
Oh,
day.
mm,
And she came up to me in one of the breaks and she said, hi, and we had a hug. And she said, I just want you to know that I use your model and I will
mm.
not let anybody make us change it.
Wow.
And I said, thank you, Lena.
Mm,
Um, and of course, it's true. And I saw that when I went up there
hmm.
because it has the same sense of order, the same sense of calm. I mean, it's a beautiful environment.
Mm,
Um, and you can't take that out of it because it is an element of it.
yeah,
But the more important part of the environment is the people.
that's right.
And there are really good people up there. They're calm, they know, they're focused, they understand what they're doing, they don't diverge from it. One of the elements of the model that I think is really critical is the recognition that kids who have had these experiences feel uncontained.
Mm,
And the important, and I know Barbara Docker Drysdale talks a lot, and Winnicott talk a lot about the importance of psychological containment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, psychological containment comes from physiological containment because that's got to come first.
Mm.
Um, and that's what I observed because that's something
Mm.
we created up there when we were starting off the pilot.
Contained
And
adults.
uh,
Mm.
containing adults, and we initially the kids would say, "No, you're going to stop me doing this," you know all that. Um, but we started off really simple by not letting them be alone,
Mm.
other than they're having a shower, they go to the toilet, all of that.
Sure.
But in the rest of their waking hours, we are positively with them.
Yeah.
And we took that down to walking everywhere with them on the property.
Mm.
So if a
Mm.
child was in the school and needed something from the house, someone would come and walk up with them to get it.
Mm.
And on the way, we'd talk about anything, what was, a bird in the tree or whatever. Doesn't matter because the containing element is from the presence,
Mm.
the calm presence. And I knew with one boy who had lived his life on the street, right? He was 13 and a half when he came in the first cohort, and he resisted everything. um, and we developed a series of ways of helping him come into the program. But the day I knew that something had clicked for him was one of the other kids was having his birthday, and we were having a barbecue on the deck, and he had forgotten to bring the boy's present
Mm.
that he'd made in the school. And he came up to me and he said, "Will you walk with me up to the house? I want to get the present." I said,
Mm.
inside, I'm going,
Mm.
on the outside, I'm going, "Of course I will." And
Seems it's
I
such a
knew,
massive it's such a massive achievement. I mean, for people who are not like us, who don't, have the level of familiarity that we do have with these children, they would just think, yeah,
so,
so
yeah,
so what? But it's
yeah,
such a huge thing. Yeah.
yeah. The same boy, I mean, I bore you with stories, but the same boy was telling me about 2 months after or 3 months after that how he thought he was doing really well in the program and was checking that out with me. And I said, "Yeah, you are."
Mm.
Um, and how he had been impacted by a newer boy who'd come in and who was still quite a lot less regulated and who made
Mm.
him feel unsafe, which was music to my ears,
Mm.
because it meant he was feeling safe.
Mm.
Um, and, we worked out some things that I was going to do to try and help him feel safer. And I reflected that story to the steering group, which was a group formed of people from the regions of the department, some bureaucrats from head office, and me and some other practitioners in child protection.
Mm.
And I told that story as an example of change and growth. And the bureaucrat made this comment. He said, "Oh, it just sounds like a lot of bullshit to me." And I said, "Well, when somebody says something and you think of the right answer 2 hours later and you
Yep.
go, ah,
Yep.
well, I actually thought of the right answer in that moment. I was very proud of
Wow.
this. Doesn't happen often. Uh, I said, well, hmm, but even if you're right, it's really high quality bullshit.
Yes.
And it was like, oh, where
Mm.
to go with that?
Well,
Um,
on that, Adela, I mean, I could talk to you for hours. I'm a little bit weird that we're both at the beginning of
yeah,
our working days. I just maybe we need to do a part two if you're up for it.
I'm always up for it.
But I think maybe on that's a nice little segue into what advice would you, if you had the opportunity to speak before heads of departments, ministers again,
Mm.
um, uh, what would you say to them about therapeutic residential care?
I would say, well, there's a bit of a push at the moment in Victoria to, in my opinion, water it down a bit.
Mm,
It's being badged as enhanced because it is giving therapeutic funding to a greater number of
hmm.
places, which
Right.
is, of course, an enhancement of sorts. But it's really only an enhancement if you do it forward rather than take some things away and put some things forward. And at
Mm,
the moment, it's a bit like that. So I'm hoping that that will be different
mm,
because the sector is having a lot of input to that. Um, I would say don't fiddle with what does work,
hmm.
add to what does work,
Mm,
take a deep breath, spend the money now because in 10 years' time, 15 years' time, is when the judgment will come
mm,
and when you will see what is the impact of what you didn't do.
yeah.
Um, and I said, I don't know. I would say, I don't know what will exactly be the impact, but I can tell
Mm,
you in broad terms what the impact is likely to be.
mm,
But it's compelling to
yeah.
try and save resources. But what do we do in terms of the judgment and the decision we make about the lives of people you've never met
Mm,
and are not likely to meet?
yeah.
Uh, because that's what it's all about. It's about the quality of life, social capital.
Yeah.
Uh, if people are worried, I don't know what it's like in South Australia, but in Victoria and other states, there's great consternation about the level of crime and
Mm,
juvenile crime, and I share that consternation
mm,
because it's not good for anybody,
no,
including the perpetrators
that's
of
right.
it. Uh, but there is if people are believing that there is no way that that can
Mm,
be impacted, they're wrong, and
yeah.
that's what I would say to them.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
would say to them, "You are wrong. There is a way. It may
Mm,
cost you a little bit more in money in the short term, but it will bring you such amazing dividends
mm,
in the longer term in social capital and the quality of life of people."
yeah. And I think, and yeah, well, just to repeat probably an earlier point, that any investment in relational capacity
Mm,
impacts behaviors down the line. If
absolutely.
you are concerned about behaviors in society, um, the focus needs to be in significant part developing relational capacity and things that kind of spin off from that, including felt self-worth.
Mm,
I had a very interesting conversation with Lisa Etherson in my last interview. Can facilitate relationships, facilitate the containment of pervasive shame.
mm,
These it's a lack of
mm,
secure relational capacity that
mm,
is, and a lack of secure sense of one's own worth
mm,
that really underlies a lot of the social ills
mm.
that, yeah, that you can almost, as you say, or you can't predict it with certainty, but you can almost guarantee
You can
that
almost
is
guarantee
the
it. Yeah,
consequence down the
absolutely.
line. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I I think a lot in metaphors, Colby. And I was having a conversation with someone just the other day about a family, and I had this metaphor spring to mind of when you're at a fun fair and you're in the Dodgem cars.
Mm,
Some people know how to drive the Dodgems really well. They've had a lot of Dodgem experience. Some people
one
haven't.
of those.
Are you? Oh, well, good. I'm not. Um, some people don't. Now, you'll always notice that the person who's operating the dodgem cars
Mm,
will hop on the back of the cars where the people are not driving
mm,
too well, to minimize the impact or the number of impacts and
mm.
help them steer. But they actually do it. I often think they would make wonderful workers with kids
Yeah.
because they do it in a way that doesn't shame.
Mm. They,
So it's
yeah.
like if I dodge a car, then we need more of those dodgem car operators because they hop on the back and they get
Mm,
it going in the right direction. And if you look at them, they're laughing and chatting with the people who are hopeless
They are
at
finicky
steering the
things.
car, but they're not laughing at them.
Mm.
They're with them.
That's a great metaphor, I think, and not they're not on your back.
Ah, mm,
They're guiding you.
they're
They're
guiding.
guiding you.
Yeah.
I think that's a great metaphor. Now, I'm not sure about your time
Mm.
and commitments today. I usually at the very end of the podcast, I say, well, I've asked you a load of questions. Have you got a question you'd like to ask me before we wrap up?
Yeah,
And do
well,
you?
I'm curious. I do because I'd like
Yep.
to know where you got the idea to do the podcast because I think it's such a fabulous idea.
Mm.
What did it emerge from?
Um, Probably, yeah. There's probably a number of contributing factors. I have dabbled in making YouTube videos. I've done a lot of training myself and face to face and online. Um, I think what really motivates this format for me is making connections and having conversations that
Mm,
matter, I think. Um, so as I said, I've tried a few different things, but what I probably like best and what best suits me, I think, in terms of as a person practitioner, my personal style is to have conversations with
mm,
people.
mm,
And that's, probably largely because the great bulk of the work that I've done across the last 30 years has been psychotherapy.
mm,
Um, in terms of, the people that I'm inviting on, there is a little bit of an agenda between Patrick and I because I think that there is a need because residential care has often in the child and youth sector has a bad reputation.
yes,
It
it
certainly
does.
has a terrible reputation here in South Australia,
Mm,
amongst practitioners, I would add.
mm,
And I think, and it, decision makers have even tried to go so far as eliminating
yeah.
residential care.
Mm,
And the reality is that that'll never happen. We
no.
will we will always need residential care. So we have to turn our mind to
Mm,
how do we make it better?
mm,
How do we address the concerns that people have? How do we address even some the myths that
yes.
exist around therapeutic residential care? So the agenda is there is a bit of an agenda to have people on the
Yeah.
podcast who can contribute to a different narrative around therapeutic
Yeah.
residential care.
Right.
Um, and then lastly, I think I really want to provide a space where people who have really significant knowledge and expertise, and I think the expertise that you get in the work,
Mm,
is shouldn't be denigrated in any
no.
way. It should be elevated.
Mm.
Those who've worked in the sector for years, decades, I don't know anyone who's worked in the sector longer than you, Adela.
No,
Um,
I
and
think
I'm
I'm a
I'm
record breaker.
the yeah, and I'm the longest serving clinical psychologist in the sector here in South Australia, just
Oh, really?
working in the sector. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I'm only at 30 years, so I'm 22 years behind you. Um, But I do think that um, I have a great interest in speaking to people who have tremendous experience and knowledge to share, who don't necessarily get the same attention from those who, who cherry pick to elevate, I guess. So I'm trying to elevate a much broader cross section of people.
Yeah, well, that's great. That's really
Mm,
good. Um, because, as you say, it's it's a, it's a poorly understood
mm,
modality of care.
hmm
I think I came into contact with a particular concept recently. It's called the Dunning-Kruger principle or the
mm,
Dunning-Kruger effect, one of
yep.
the other. And basically, it's a cognitive bias whereby you don't know what you don't know.
Mm,
And if you don't know what you don't know, how can you make good decisions
yeah.
about it?
Mm,
I really like the Dunning-Kruger effect.
hmm
Well, I don't like it, but I like the conceptualization of it. Got no
mm,
idea where it comes from. I'll have to research it a bit. But it is true. If you
mm,
don't know what you don't know, you're going to make decisions that don't necessarily prosper anyone well.
that's right. Mm,
And I think that is the case often in
mm,
relation to bureaucratic
mm,
systems.
yeah.
Not putting bureaucrats down, they have a value, but
Mm.
they don't know what they don't know.
No, and they need to hear
Yeah,
from people who do know.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So
Yeah,
thank you very much, Adela,
pleasure.
for being so gracious as to appear on this fledgling podcast.
I've
There's
enjoyed it.
so much more I would like to ask you, like just to flag a few. I'd love to speak to you more about that transition from like a training center, but it was called something different back in the 70s, where that transition from what had gone on before, the
Yes,
girls who had been young
yes,
offenders or had lacked moral
yes.
something or other,
They've been
into
in moral danger.
yeah, in moral day into something therapeutic, which of course
Yeah,
is what happened with the Cotswold community and likely many others. The Cotswold community had started out as a reformatory, and then Richard
yeah.
Balbirnie had turned it into a therapeutic community. So I'd love to, yeah, I would have loved to have asked you a bit more about that, and also um, your model and how
Oh,
that's
yeah,
been
details of the
applied
model.
in other
Yes,
in I think you said 11 other programs.
12, 12 others.
Yeah,
Yeah,
12 others. So look, till another time, thank you
yes,
very much from
pleasure.
me and from our listeners, and look forward to speaking to you again another time.
Great pleasure. Thank you very much, Colby.